Hello and welcome back to another video. In this tutorial I'll be showing how to make comfortable short pants, and if this is something you're interested in learning, you definitely want to keep on watching. So to begin, you'll be needing your following measurements. Your waist circumference, I'm using 28 inches. Sometimes my waist goes between 28 and 30, but I'm using 28 for this project. You'll be needing your hip circumference, mine is 40 inches. Then you'll be needing your crotch depth. Now to get the depth of your crotch, you basically want to sit on a hard surface and take the distance from your waist to where your buttocks touches the chair or the hard surface. All right, you'll also be needing your crotch width, and the formula I use to get my crotch width is I divide my hip measurement or my hip circumference by 4 and add whatever figure I have to what I have when I divide my hip circumference by 16. So currently my hip circumference is 40 inches. When I divide 40 inches by 4, I would have 10 inches. Then when I divide 40 inches by 16, I would have 2.5 inches. So I'm going to add that 10 inches to that 2.5 inches, and the width of my crotch will be 12.5 inches. Now this is the formula I use when getting the width of my crotch, and it has proven to be accurate all the time. So you basically want to divide your hip circumference by 4 and add the figure you get to what you have when you divide your hip circumference by 16. So you'd also need your thigh circumference, mine is 25 inches. Then you would need the length of the shorts, so we are using 16 inches since this is a short. And these are all the lines marked on my paper: my waist to hip, my waist to crotch, as well as my waist to the length. So I added 2 inches for the hem allowance at the bottom. Now when doing this, you want to take your vertical distance from your waist to your hip to your crotch and to the length as well. All right, so what I'll be doing next is to take a quarter of my hip circumference across my waist, across my hip, and across the crotch line there. So from the edge of the paper, I am going to mark a quarter of my hip circumference across that waistline, which is 10 inches. Remember, my hip circumference is 40, so when I divide that by 4, I would have 10 inches. I'm going to mark 10 inches across the hip line as well and across the crotch line. So after marking all those points, I'm going to connect all those dotted spots together using a straight line from my waist to the crotch line. So you want to connect all those points together. So when you're working, you want to work with your own measurements. So depending on what your hip circumference is, so when you divide that by 4, that is what you have marked out when you do this. All right, so what we'll be doing next is to mark out the crotch width. I'm using the formula we gave earlier. Our crotch width is 12.5 inches. So along that crotch line there, I'm going to mark 12.5 inches. All right, so I'm just going to place my tape on the edge of the paper and mark the 12.5-inch mark along that crotch line. So that would serve as the width of the crotch. Okay, now from this point here, I'm going to come upwards or outwards by half an inch. So I'm going to come outwards by half an inch, and I like to use half an inch because I find that when the crotch is not deep enough, it tends to create V lines on the front, which I do not really like, or it tends to separate your buttocks into two, which I do not like either. So I like my crotch deep enough. Okay, then on that line, that hip line we drew earlier, I'm going to come up by 0.75 inches. So I'm going to come up by 0.75 inches along this line. So next, I'm going to connect all those points together to get the depth and the curve for the crotch. Okay, so that is what I'll be using for the depth and the curve of the crotch. So what I'll be doing next is to get the midpoint for this pattern, and to do this I'm going to mark the midpoint of my hip. Now my hip line is 10 inches with this measurement, and the midpoint will be 5 inches. So that is what I'm marking across all the lines, across my waist, my hip, the crotch, and the length. I am marking 5 inches from top to bottom across all body lines. Now this is to get the midpoint of your pattern. Okay, so once that is done, I'm going to connect all those dotted spots together from top to bottom using my ruler and getting a straight line. Now this is what it should look like once you're done. The next step would be to mark out the waist measurement. Now my waist circumference that we're using for this project is 28. So when I divide that by 4, I have 7 inches. So I'm going to mark out 7 inches. Now when taking the 7 inch, I'm not marking from the edge of the paper. Rather, I'll be marking from that line that has the curve for the crotch along the waist. So basically just see what I'm doing and I'm sure you understand. So you can see that I'm marking, taking the measurements from the inner part of the paper and not from the edge of the paper. So I'm just going to mark 7 inch like this, and once that is done, I'm going to connect it back to meet the hip line along the edge, ensuring that I create that hip curve along the side. Okay, so what I'll be taking next is my thigh measurement. So my thigh circumference is 25 inches. When I divide that by 2, I would have 12.5. So on the length of this, since we're making a short, I'm going to mark 12.5 inch along that length line. So that length line is also my thigh. So if you're making like a trouser, so that would actually be your thigh measurement, but since we're making shorts, that is where my thigh sits. Okay, so I'm going to connect that 12-inch spot to that crotch line curve that we drew earlier, and it should look something like this when you're done. Okay, so you want to use your own individual measurements for this. And on the outer side of the pattern at the base here, I'm going to reduce the outer corner by half an inch, depending on how wide you want your pants to be. But I decided to reduce it by half an inch because I do not want that outer edge to be pointy or look, or to have a kind of sharp look. So I'm going to reduce that outer edge by half an inch. Okay, then I would connect it backwards to meet with the hip curve at the top. So from that half an inch, I'm going to draw a line to meet with that hip curve at the top here. All right, now this is what it is looking like at this point. So what I'll be doing next is to drop the waistline by 1 inch along that crotch line of the center front. So from that waistline, I came down by 1 inch, and then I'm going to connect it back upwards to meet with the waist along the side. So when you're done, you should have a slant line that looks something like this. So this is what the waistline for the front should look like when you're done. Next up, we'll be making the fly for the front zipper. And to do this, from that line we just dropped, that slant waistline, I'm going to come down by 8 inches along that crotch line or that crotch curve. Then I'm going to come outwards by 2 inches. So I'm marking 2 inches outwards and 8 inches downwards. Then I'm going to connect those two mark spots like this. You could use your freehand or your French curve. So after drawing it out, I went ahead to separate it from the front plan, and this is what it should look like when you're done. So this would be the fly for the zipper as well as the front plan of this project that we are making. Okay, so next we'll be making the back plan, and we'll be using the front as a guide because every most of the measurements will be the same except for the waistline, the crotch, and the size of the back along the inner section. So what I did is to place the front on the back pattern or the back plan that I have drawn out, and on that crotch line I'm going to come 2 inches outwards. So I'm just going, you can tape it down if you desire, but yeah, I really did not tape it down. So I'm going to mark 2 inches outwards like this on the crotch line, and I'm going to mark 2 inches outwards as well on the hem as well, 2 inches outwards on the hem as well as the hip and the waistline. So basically along that inner section of the pattern, the back would be 2 inches wider than the front along all the inner sections. So I'm just going to mark 2 inches along all those points from top to bottom, even the crotch area. as well as the waistline. Then I would connect all those points together. After making that 2-inch extension on the inner section of the back, I'm going to cut out the sides using the front as a guide, the outer sides. Now do note that the front and the back are equal in the outer perimeter, so the outer section of the sides and the length. The only difference is that the inner section, or the side that has the crotch and the curve as well as the waist, is what is different between the front and the back. Okay, now what I'm going to do is to reduce that waistline of the back by 1/2 inch. Now what this does is that it reduces puffiness or bulginess along the center back waistline. So I'm going to reduce it by 1/2 inch like this, and this would help reduce the bulginess or puffiness along the waistline because I'll be attaching a band to it. But if you're using like an elastic waistband at the back, you might not need to do this, okay? But if you're not going to be attaching an elastic at the waistband at the back, you would definitely want to reduce it. All right, so I'm going to cut around the outer perimeter like this at the back. Okay, so this is from now where my back waistline would start from, and not from the initial 2 inches. I'll be taking the measurement from that 1/2 inch that we just removed from the back waistline. Okay, so from that 1/2 inch that we just took away from the back waistline, I'm going to measure 4.5 inch inwards along the waistline, and this would be for my dart. So I'm going to measure 4.5 inch inwards along that waistline. Then I'm going to come down from that point by 3 inches, and this will serve as the depth for the dart. So 3 inches. Then I'm going to connect those lines together from that waistline to that 3 inch point. I'm going to connect it together. Then I'm going to mark 1/2 inch on either side of that line to make the darts for the back plan of this project. All right, so just see what I'm doing, and I'm sure you understand. Anyways, if you're still watching up to this moment and you haven't subscribed, kindly click on the subscribe button to join the family and turn on post notifications so you'll be notified whenever I upload new videos. Okay, and if you've enjoyed this video so far, do leave a like, click on the like button, and leave a comment in the comment section. I would really love to know your thoughts about this video so far. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut out the outer sections or the inner sections of the back plan. So starting from the hem all the way to the crotch curve and the waistline. So these are both the front and the back pieces laid out here, or the back and front patterns, and the fly for the zipper. So I'm going to use these pieces to cut out my main fabric and commence sewing. Now when cutting out the piece for the fly of the zipper, I'm going to cut 2 pieces on fold. Now the fold is going to be on the straight edge while the cut would be on that curved edge. So the fold would be on this straight edge here, or on this straight part of the fly, while I would cut through the curve on this other side. So I'll be cutting on fold, and I'll be cutting 2 of these. Okay, now these are all the pattern pieces or my fabric pieces after they've been cut. I cut 2 for the back, 2 for the front, and 2 pieces for the fly. Now the fly was cut on fold like I said it would be. So these are all the pieces out here. Now this is what the fly looks like. So remember I said to be cut on fold. So when you open it up, you can see that the straight edge is folded into 2, while the curved edge has the cut, or that was where I cut through the fly. I cut the curved edge, or I cut the fly through the curved edge basically. So this I have 2, and I have 2 of my front as well as my back plan. Now on my front plan, along that waistline, I would mark 2 inches inward from the outer edge, I'm going to mark 2 inches inwards, and I'm just going to create a small notch here, and this is for the pocket. Okay, then from the on the hip line, from the outer edge as well, I'm going to mark 7 inches downwards. So you want to mark 7 inches downwards and 2 inches inwards from the waist, and 7 inches downwards on your hip line. So that would be for the pocket, or that would be a guide that I'll be using to make the pocket for this project much later. Okay, so this is the front, and I'm just going to go ahead and show you guys how to attach a pocket to this. All right, I don't like to cut out my pocket curve from my main fabric before attaching the pocket, the actual pocket pieces. So what I like to do is to cut out two individual pieces that are 10 inches wide and 12 inches long. Okay, so now what I'll do is just measure a fabric that is 12 inches long and 10 inches wide. Okay, now I'm going to place this right sides facing onto the right side of my fabric. So the shorter part, or the 10-inch part, would be along the width, while the 12-inch would be along the depth. Okay, so I'm just going to pin on that 2-inch spot and on that 7-inch spot. So you want to use a pin to secure this on both sides before stitching from top to bottom. So when I pin this down like this, I'm just going to take it to my sewing machine and stitch from this end here all the way through the top. All right, after that has been stitched down, I can now cut off that 2-inch extension at the side of the trouser or the side of the shorts. So that 2-inch extension that we just marked, or we had as a guide earlier to attaching the pocket, I am going to cut it off right now because we will not be needing it anymore. Okay, so when you cut that off, you can now flip your bag inwards or your pocket inwards to the wrong side. Now, when flipping your pocket inwards, you want to ensure that it doesn't get to that center front where the zip would be attached. And what I do is, from the edge of the pocket there, I measure 2 inches. So you can use anything between 2 inches to 3 inches. So I measure, you can use anything between 2.5 inches to 3 inches, not two. So I measure 2.5 inch inwards, and I'm going to pin along that waistline, ensuring that I pin the pocket to the waistline of the pants. All right, then the excess fabric that we have at the back here for the pocket, I'm going to flip it back outwards. Now when flipping it back outwards, you want to ensure that whatever fabric that is extending from the side is enough to replace the initial fabric that was cut off. Now do note that we cut off 2 inches from the sides. So when extending this pocket outwards towards the side, I want to ensure that I replace whatever measurement I cut off. So since I cut off 2 inches, I want to ensure that this fabric that I'm bringing back towards the side is 2 inches and is enough to replace what was cut off, so your pants don't end up looking shorter. When I am satisfied with the width, I'm going to pin it down along the waistline. Okay, after pinning that down, I'm going to stitch the pocket to the waistline. Then I would stitch the bottom of the bag closed at the bottom like this. I would stitch it closed. Then I would stitch the pocket to the sides of the pants as well. So I'll be stitching the waistline, the sides, and the bottom of the bag closed. Okay, now after stitching, this is what it looks like. This is what the pocket looks like on the side. So next up, I'm going to go ahead and cut lining pieces for the front and for the back. Now lining your pants is completely optional. You can choose to stitch it down like that, but I decided to use a lining. So I'm going to use the lining to turn the hem of the pants, while the sides and the top I would just stop stitch. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and cut out lining pieces for the front as well as for the back. So after turning the back pieces with lining, as you can see, I turned the hem with the lining, while the sides and the top I basically just stop stitched all the way around. I'm going to place the two back pieces right sides facing. Then I would sew that crotch line from end to end. So you want to ensure that your back pieces are equal in length and you don't have one being longer than the other. So I'm just going to place them right sides facing and stitch the crotch line from top to bottom. Then I will take the darts on the back. So I'll be stitching from this end all the way to the top here. Then I will take the darts on either side of the back plan. After stitching it together and taking the dart, this is what the back looks like. This is the bottom crotch area and this is the hem and the dart on the waist. Now for the front, I basically placed them right sides facing like I did for the back, but instead of sewing from end to end, I basically stitched a few inches from the bottom of the crotch up to the start of the crotch curve. Okay, so you can sew up to 3 inches or 4 inches from that end, but I stitched down 3 inches to the end of the curve. Okay, so what I'll be doing next is to attach the zipper and the fly for the zipper to the front. Now for the zipper, I'm going to place my front pieces right sides facing. Then from that waistline, I'm going to come down by 7 inches. Now your zipper should not be deeper than 7 inches, okay? So I'm just going to place my tape on the waistline and measure 7 inches downwards and mark the 7-inch spot. Now that is where the zipper or the zipper fly would stop. If it exceeds 7 inches, it tends to be tacky or kind of difficult to sew. So that is where the zipper would stop. So after joining the zipper, this is what it looks like. Here you can see it looks really nice and neat. So what I'll be doing next is to attach the sides together. So what I'll be doing is place the back plan over the front plan right sides facing. Then I would stitch the edges or the sides by 1/2 inch on either side before stitching the base of the or the bottom part of the trouser, which is this part of the front to the bottom part of the trouser on the back. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, after which I'll be attaching a waistband.
We've lost track of time, don't know how to feel.